Gotcha.
Now,
Don't make me redo.
No, you're
redo
good.
it.
You're okay.
Okay. And. Now we lost this. Okay, good. So it's always sort of difficult to look back at historic images because we pine for what was there. Frequently, they seem like they were active commercials, mixed use, mobility. And in fact, that was much of downtown's pre-automobile centric locations. Lots of uses in close proximity in relationship to nature. Usually that nature was what stimulated the economy. So this is the team. Jeremy made the introduction. This is us on site a few months ago. I'm going to move out of your way there. And this is what the initiative is. So it's not a master plan. We're evaluating the geography for environmental issues. We're trying to figure out what the economic opportunities are in the region, like what actually is driving the economy regionally. Eric will talk to that. John will talk about the environmental piece. And as the architect, urban planner, we're going to try to see how does this area transform over time and what sort of moves that. So it is a large geography, although we will talk tonight about the 200,000 square feet that's across the street from the Forbes School and what some opportunities might be for that. But again, we don't have solutions, but we want to scratch the surface about possibilities. So I brought this up earlier. This is a large former landfill. What's called the 13-acre site. That's part of this study. We're going to talk a little bit about that. So we could walk there in 7 minutes if we so desired. We won't, but it's possible. The trail network, how this area might connect to that, and then the complex. So you would have to trespass to actually see what these images represent, but it's remarkable if you were to jump a fence and your river is really quite picturesque. Unfortunately, you can't really see it from very many places. And that's not uncommon, but part of this effort will try to make more visible your natural systems, even if, in fact, they are environmentally contained. So John will talk a little bit more about what this site is, this 13 acres, but it more or less parallels your river, which I think, and maybe you can correct me, is the only river in Connecticut that's entirely within the state. Is that true? Okay.
Begins and ends within the state of Connecticut.
Begins and ends, that's like a differentiator. That's a good thing, right? So these are just images that when we were strolling by. It's pretty amazing. There's a trail network already in the region. This area is intended to connect to that. And you might say, well, people don't really get on bikes anymore, but don't be fooled. Recreation and access is a big deal. And if this site could somehow connect to that, that's going to be an economic generator. And it's going to add visibility to a property that's not very visible. Sir, do you have a question?
Yeah, I have a comment.
Okay.
I don't know if you know this or not, but that land along the river there was the old mill race they brought water into the factory. And the canal is still there. And it looks like a landfill because there's a lot of junk thrown in it.
Yeah.
But in fact, I think it's got potential to be something really beautiful again.
The comment is about what lies beneath, which is part of the city's history. And I think that's a great comment. We look forward to delving into that. And in fact, I think this is from your paper there, this image. We did credit you. The mayor of the ribbon cutting fairly recently, you've got a trail network that stops just short, if this is your downtown, just short of this property. And that again is an opportunity if we think about access and visibility and natural systems. I know it's hard to see. All of these slides will be made available to everyone. You can look at them in more detail. But the network is pretty substantial. And as a trail network goes, that's a fairly nice right of way. People invested in that, and you want to build from your assets. That would be a great thing. So we are here at the Forbes School. I'm going to talk a little bit now about 535 Michigan. Am I pronouncing that right? Michigan, right across the way, and this building number 1 and building number 5. If you're here on a Saturday, you've seen the flea market, that's building number 1. Building number 5 is the boiler house that was fed by the Canal Raceway, right here at the end of, so we are here, here's Michigan, here's the river. The whole complex is about 210,000 square feet. We are in conversations with the property owner. He's aware that this is happening. He's sort of interested in what we find. And here's images of the flea market, a remarkable structure in building number 1. So sorry if I'm in your way there. So here's building 5, the river is back there. This is Michigan. So that we've been through all but one building so far. We'll get through that one. This is the boiler house that we saw last month. Like all boiler houses, it has a smokestack that's vulnerable, but it's also an icon. And these vertical elements can be lit, they can be art, they can signify place. But inside it's pretty rough, and the boilers are still there, and sure enough, the roof is crumbling down. The property owner is interested in preserving this building. He wants to figure out what to do with it, so that's a good thing. But fairly small, 4,000 square feet. A little bit bigger than this room, but not much, so it's not huge, but high volume. So we are, as architects, we're evaluating building by building structure. There are contamination issues. That's sort of what we're doing now to get an understanding of the vulnerability of certain buildings or their stability. And as mill complexes go, this one is better than most that we've worked on. So why we're so fascinated about this project, and perhaps why you're here, is the repositioning of this site really should lead towards greater economic development for the town, for the city. So not just about the complex, 200,000 square feet is a large, that would be a regional mall, would be 200,000 square feet. So that's a big space. You're not going to fill it up entirely very soon, but over time, these places, if they are well positioned to the market and they're not overly contaminated, can change. So it's part of the neighborhood. I hope that's why you're here. It's adjacent to your river, and there are institutions, and I mean the Ford School as part of that. That's also an asset. Not every community has those things in close proximity. The question was raised. So this circle represents the broader study area. Most of this is in local business. It is largely a manufacturing area, but as you can see, and as some of you represent, surrounded by houses, surrounded by neighborhoods. And the brown here, the residential of 6,000 square feet or less. So you're maybe familiar with the history. We haven't visited your great history center, but it's been a place of production for 160 years. And a famous place of production, actually. It was at the one time the world's largest manufacturer of roller skates and ice skates. Many people may not know that. If you knew that, raise your hand. Okay, less than half. It had been other things as well. In the mid-20th century, they made golf club shafts, and many of the spaces there are large enough to produce such things. It's about 11.5 acres, and now it's a collection of, there's an artist studio, which is pretty impressionable, up against Michigan, a famous Brooklyn artist, actually. There's a boat storage and boat repair that takes up a lot of the sort of space. A lot of the boats that you see there are people that are waiting to pick up their boats or haven't picked them up. And then there's some vacant space in the flea market. So I just want to seed one way that you might start to think about this site to transform. And these are urban design principles. They are some planning principles that should support or form the foundation of revitalization. One is make a stronger connection between Michigan and the river. That would make a big deal if you could actually access the river. You can see it from the road. You can also see it from here. You just can't get there. That alignment, and this is a building in Portland, Oregon, but it's the idea that industrial shells work really well for other uses. That's an opportunity. So here's what you see you're at the gate. I know it's a little dark. Here's the smokestack. This is building 5. These buildings adjacent to it, brick, wood structures, not in terrible shape. They work really well as repositories for all kinds of other uses. Housing often, but also economic development. And Eric will talk a little bit about the culture of industry here, which can be repositioned, or that these buildings can form the basis of that. A second principle is that the river should not be seen as the back, but rather as the front. And if a trail connects on the river side, they will be seen as front doors. And interestingly enough, this is a photograph. My back is at the river in this photograph. You're seeing essentially large doors that open up towards the river. But in order to see them, you would have to go to the back. We think that could be a new front over time, regardless of the use of the buildings, but capturing the relationship to the river. Another observation is that much of this complex faces Michigan and actually has a certain curb appeal. At least you can see it from the road. And so thinking about a portion of the complex, especially administrative buildings as part of mill complexes, are frequently thought of as a great place to start. They're relatively small. They're separate from the rest of the complex, although this is interconnected. The footprint lays out pretty well for housing. Could be any type of housing. But a building like that you see from the street could be about 10 or 12 units of housing. If you get people living in a building, actually, and living on a site, there's just more activity. So we'll see if the market plays out, but this building in particular could be a pretty good place to start just to get some life on the campus. It's vacant right now. And you don't have to drive very far to see all kinds of industrial buildings that are perfectly acceptable and in fact quite remarkable as places to live. With high ceilings and wood, natural materials, etc. We could have shown 1,000 different examples. This building directly across from the school is about 55,000 square feet. A good rule of thumb is a unit is around 1,000 square feet. So a building of this scale, 3 floors, if it lays out well, could be about 50 units of housing. Now you might say, we don't want housing, but I'm just suggesting that's an order of magnitude scale. Some of the buildings were built more recently in the 70s and 60s. And these tend to be the high bay column-free spaces where the golf clubs were manufactured. So the buildings in the back, actually, if I go back here, these buildings, if this is the river here, these buildings actually, surprisingly, even though they're concrete block, have 35-foot high ceilings and bring in all kinds of natural light. They're steel trusses. They were never places of heavy manufacturing. I mean, they were manufacturing, but they're fairly clean as we think. And those types of spaces work great for active recreation. We know that you've got a successful athletic field across the river. It's not too far away. There's a trail here. You have a health center right across from this complex. So this idea of health and wellness and connectivity could start to coalesce if one could attract rock climbing, paddleball, indoor soccer, name your kind of recreation. But those types of spaces covered adjacent to the river, that's a differentiator. I know you grew up in this area and you were constantly trying to find a place to play soccer, right?
Yes, yeah, we used to drive, I lived in Woodbury, and we used to drive all the way to Farmington and Glastonbury to play indoor soccer, so. Definitely wouldn't help my parents if there was something close to that.
Just a couple more, all right, bear with me. Many of these complexes have spaces between the buildings. Those spaces work great for all kinds of things, including beer gardens and courtyards and active areas of congregation. Again, I could have chose a million different images of this. We've all seen it. But at the moment, if you looked in there, you'd think this place doesn't look so nice, but it just takes a little bit of cleanup and some activities and some programming, and places like that can be quite attractive and can become magnets for your city. And then lastly, increasingly, the public demands access to your waterfronts. And frequently that means overcoming industrial, physical, political boundaries. If there is a way from this property to get down to the water's edge, and in fact, if you walked in the back, you'd see a little bench that some people hang out there, and if that was more civic, that would help to revitalize this area. So with that as an overview from the design standpoint, Eric's going to talk a little bit more at a regional scale, what's happening with the economy. And I have to say, I was really surprised and quite enthusiastic about what he's finding. So these drawings are complex. He's simplified them. We don't want to dumb them down though either. So the points he's making are kind of rooted in his research, and I'll let Eric walk you through those.
Sure, great, thank you. Yeah, so as David mentioned before, as we're starting to think about potential uses, what would be viable from an economic perspective. Part of this study involved doing a market analysis, so that was looking at population trends, economic activity, as well as what's the most recent commercial real estate activity been in Torrington, as well as in the broader region, which I'll explain what I mean by the region.
Yeah, just make sure you enunciate this.
Oh, yes. Yes. So I'm going to just start with sort of three main themes, and these are sort of key insights around those themes. And from those themes, I'm going to sort of expound upon how I think these support potential uses for a number of these sites. So the first thing I want to talk about is population trends. So there was some mention about how it just seems like things haven't been vibrant in the past. Well, interestingly enough, that may have been the case in Connecticut historically, and by historically, I mean from 2000 to around 2018, 2019. But what we saw with the pandemic, remote work, a lot of people moving out of urban cores, there was actually a lot of in-migration into the Litchfield County, Northwest Hills region, and in Torrington as well. So I will cover a little bit more about that. From an economic perspective, as David had mentioned as well, Torrington has some very strong industry sectors such as manufacturing. And, you do hear some sense of the declines in manufacturing, although that is not entirely true. The federal government is really making efforts to improve onshoring of manufacturing. The state has prioritized manufacturing. So it's really becoming a key focal point for economic development. And it just so happens Torrington has a huge concentration of competitive industries in that sector. And then the last thing I want to talk about is current commercial real estate activity. There have been a few new developments, a few new retail tenants that have really showed promise in the region. And I'll speak a little bit more about that as well. And so the first thing I wanted to talk about, as I mentioned before, in terms of migration, and what do I mean by migration? I mean people moving from outside of the US, but also people moving from county to county and state to state. And the really interesting thing that I want to highlight is, so as I mentioned before, from 2000 to around 2019, Connecticut had seen a lot of gradual declines. This is children moving out of the home, taking jobs in other states, going away to college. This is also people moving to other more affordable areas if they're downsizing or they need to upsize if they're expanding their family. Those trends have started to reverse in the recent years. Connecticut and the Northwest Hills, which that's the new county delineation, it's really hard word to say. You can think about it as Litchfield County. Actually saw net positive increases in population, which has been a reversal of historical trends. And the most key part of this graphic that I want to show you is this in green. This is domestic migration, and you can think of that as people moving from other states and other counties, which particularly come from New York, as well as Massachusetts moving into the region. And so what does that meant for the city of Torrington? So each of these curves, you can think about this as your population distribution. So if you add up all the people at each age from 0 to 100, this sort of creates this curve. The two things I really want to highlight are where the peaks are and where the troughs are. And so as you can see from 2000 to 2010 to 2010, you see that ridge slowly moving to the right. This is the existing resident population. And then every decade you take a census, they're 10 years older. The other thing that I want to really highlight is this peak right here in the red. The Northwest Hills Planning Region, which is, you can also think of as Litchfield County, has seen large in-migration of that domestic population, which was those green bars that I mentioned here. Those a lot were family households. And that's where you see this sort of uptick in younger residents. It's family households and young couples moving into the region and moving into Torrington, which is a positive market indicator when you think about potential uses from a commercial real estate perspective. And so if we think about this from sort of the economy-wide perspective, I know there's a lot of text here that's kind of hard to read, so to just really simplify what this figure is trying to show you, you can think about this quadrant here. These are your most competitive sectors. You have the highest employment compared to other communities, and these are also where you're having your most financial output. It's a way of considering that. We put emerging, you can think of that as you have less employment than some other competitor regions, but it's also a growing industry, which is also a very positive indicator. And then the two on the left here, strong and weak but declining, these just simply mean that there have been a decrease in jobs over the recent years. The one that I really want to highlight is manufacturing, because as you can see, it's very strong. It's really high up on this figure, but it's over to the left a little bit, suggesting that it's strong but declining. The important thing that I want to note with that is very much a demographic case, not the fact that businesses are performing worse than in previous years. The challenge with manufacturing, which is a statewide challenge, is that a lot of manufacturing jobs are held by people who are in older age cohorts. So as you can imagine, you're starting to see retirements occurring, which just starts to see that contraction. But the nice thing about viewing manufacturing from a strategic point of view is that also means opportunity for jobs. Hiring for many of these jobs is very high. There's really high demand for advanced manufacturing, things such as CNC programming, some of the more technical manufacturing skills. So it offers an economic opportunity as well. And I will explain how that sort of translates into a use in real estate perspective. And so if we now think about that from a real estate perspective, what I'm showing you here is the constructions and leases of industrial space. The green bars here are showing take up for people leaving space. And the real important thing that I want to highlight is some of these smaller upticks throughout the Northwest Hills planning region. So Litchfield County, there has been a lot of industrial activity of companies taking up smaller industrial spaces. A lot of emerging industrial businesses are smaller, they're more niche, they're more boutique and specialized, and they don't need as much space as you would imagine in traditional manufacturing or industrial space. So that's where you're seeing a lot of this activity, which is a very positive sign. Another take in the industrial and flex space is actually artists, maker spaces, which there's a very vibrant arts and maker space scene throughout the Northwest Hills region, ranging all the way from Kent into Torrington. So this is another really strong competitive asset for the city. And then just for further evidence of what I'm explaining to you is the vacancy rates in Torrington and the Northwest Hills planning region. Vacancy rates are at 4%. I know just telling you an arbitrary percentage might not mean anything, but 4% is very, very low for industrial space. That means demand is high, people are taking up active space, and it's a really strong indicator that there is demand for more industrial space. And so as I mentioned before about how demographics are starting to change, and that is a very positive indicator for the city and the region, another way of sort of looking at another indicator that marks that sort of change is retail activity. Who is moving, who is setting up a restaurant or a chain in a community. And there's actually something that you all might find is very funny. It's called the Starbucks effect. There's been a lot of research done about where Starbucks locates a coffee shop is based on the consumer potential in that area. So you usually see home prices rise. It usually means that there's growing incomes, there's more consumer spending. So it usually is a leading indicator of growth in a community if you start seeing Starbucks cited in a community. So that's a very positive indicator, as well as other chains such as Chipotle. Again, another indicator of the spending potential. And then also recently the Tractor Supply, the business activity in that consumer spending. And just to sort of put that in context of the graphic here, the full bar, so if you add the dark red and the light red, that's the whole region. The dark red is just Torrington. So the really striking thing here is almost all of the retail activity of people leasing space is happening in Torrington, which really underscores Torrington as a spending center, an employment center, and all of these are very good, strong indicators for potential uses for the site. And then one other thing I want to talk about is multifamily. One of the challenges, particularly in today's economy, is it's really hard to develop multifamily. Borrowing is really expensive. Construction costs are really high, but rents are also rising, which is good news for developers. That helps them pencil deals. The interesting thing about all of these sort of dynamics is that in Torrington, the vacancy rate for multifamily is at 1.4%, which is exceptionally low. That means almost everything is leased up. That is a huge indicator of potential. And in the more broad market research that we did, there was the most recent multifamily property was here, right along the river in Torrington. It was leased up very quickly, which is another indicator of that demand, and those rents are continuing to increase and they are being taken up, which is again, another strong sign for multifamily if developers can get it to pencil out. And so to sum up this and some of the other slides from our more broader market research, if I were to just describe this to you in terms of strengths, weaknesses, barriers, and the opportunities, which are most important, as David had mentioned, and I hope I've underscored in this section, Torrington is a regional center for Litchfield County and the Northwest Hills Planning Region. It has a very strong manufacturing base. It has a growing healthcare base, and it also has a very vibrant arts sector. These are all sectors growing more broadly in the state. There's lots of funding programs for businesses and real estate in these types of industries, which are all positive signs and strong strengths for the state. In terms of weaknesses, things to consider, housing and commercial space are continuing to see very positive trends, but in the current economy, development is becoming very difficult, as I mentioned before. Interest rates, the cost of capital, these things make it hard for deals to pencil, and it also might provide certain opportunities for reuse where blanket development from the ground up might not be feasible. In terms of barriers, kind of as I mentioned before, these are closely linked to weaknesses. Current economic conditions are really, really tough and strained, but as we've started to see in more recent months, inflation has gone down. There are positive signs in terms of the Fed's position towards interest rates, and all these things play into what would be a more positive environment going forward for commercial real estate development. And then the last thing that I want to leave you with from this sort of section of the presentation is, again, that strong manufacturing and retail is really a competitive and vibrant opportunity for the city, as well as the arts, and sort of agglomeration of these three industries make for some really interesting spaces, as well as very interesting places, which attract more people to the community, people to visit. You get more foot traffic, more consumer spending, all of which is very good news for the city. And with that, I want to pass it over to speak more about the environmental conditions. Here's John.
Yeah, great. Thank you, and David, thank you again. As David's team knows, this project has a really close place in my heart. I've been coming to the city since birth. My family was here almost a century. My father and his brother were born on Smith Street, just off Highland Avenue. Both grandparents worked in two of the factories, unfortunately, not across the street, but one at American Brass, and my grandmother for the Torrington Company, and my grandmother spent almost 20 plus years in the towers. So I would come visit Department 10B as a child, and have seen Torrington go through its ebbs and flows. So it's really appreciate being part of the Gamble team to come work on this. As Eric had said, I'm going to talk about the environmental conditions evaluation. Any responsible development, especially in the state of Connecticut, which is fairly heavily regulated, has to take into consideration the current environmental conditions of the property. What that means for our part of the Gamble team is we're conducting what's called a third-party environmental evaluation. That looks at both the Brunswick Mill property, as David had pointed out, and then the 13-acre undeveloped parcel that's located between Midget and the Naugatuck River, which David had showed some photos of. I also have some photos there. As part of that work, David had shown a picture before. Members of my team had come and completed site inspections to kind of look what's going on at the site now. We know there was historical manufacturing. We know there's some boat operations, art space. What are those? What potential impact are those having on the property currently? We're reviewing the existing environmental reports. Again, long industrial use of chemicals, potential for spills, leaks, contamination of the property, which would need to be cleaned up to the state standards, and that's the RSRs, or the remediation standard regulations. We have to assess the remaining work to be done. There has been a bit of environmental work done on the property. I'll speak to that. But there is still more to do. And what kind of schedule does that look like? To bring it to its current use or to allow for its current use to remain or develop other alternatives. And that's part of the work, working with David, to conceptualize these ideas and see what will and will not work based on the environmental conditions. As part of that, we'll develop cleanup costs for various end use scenarios. I know David's talked about a couple things tonight, and we're working with David's team to say, yes, that will work. No, that won't work. We need to do more, or what's been done is enough. And then we will document those findings and an end product with David to show potential costs and end use. All right, as David mentioned, you can see the top of the slide, but we've kind of deemed these the manufacturing parcel and the north parcel. The manufacturing parcel is where the Brunswick Mill is, buildings we see across the street. As David mentioned, it's about 11.5 acres, 14 buildings on the property and other paved parking areas where the flea market operates in that upper one during the summer months. As David mentioned, approximately 150 years in industrial use and manufacturing of hardware, sporting goods, and those resulted in activities, right? Forging, casting, heat treating, plating, stripping, degreasing, lacquering, etc. The list goes on and on. Each of those activities potentially involve the use of chemicals, could have released chemicals or other contaminants into the environment. About the mid-1990s, significant environmental assessment was done. And keep in mind, this is not done by my company. We're looking at reports as a third party that were done on behalf of the responsible party who's responsible in the state of Connecticut's eyes for investigating and then subsequently remediating the problem. So just so that's clear, this is based on document review that we've done, not actual testing that my firm has done. Those were all completed under the Connecticut Property Transfer Program, not to bore you with the details, but when a property meets certain conditions in the state of Connecticut and it's sold, it gets triggered into what's called the Property Transfer Program, and that's when the state gets a hard look at the environmental conditions of the property, and the property begins to move towards remediation, which is a fancy word for cleanup. That investigation identified 14 areas of concern located throughout the property. And areas of concern where activities had occurred that had potential for releases to affect the environment. They did find releases, not unsurprisingly, again, 150 years of activity. They were releases of, these are volatile organic compounds, semi-volatile organics, ETPH, cyanide treating done, metals, again, there was grinding, burring, polychlorinated biphenyls. You folks have probably heard that word, heard it in the news. Question?
I had an opportunity to review the environmental citizens in the 90s. Everything you're saying is absolutely correct. But as I read, there were like 3 boxes for the documents.
Sure.
One of the things that they mentioned was that what they were able to find represented only a percentage of what was on that property. In order to find the rest of it, they would have to dig up the floor, the was under concrete floors itself. Has you know if any study has been done bringing those floors?
Yeah, read the question. Well, that's a good question. So the question was, I referenced these studies that were done in the mid-90s to kind of assess where the contamination is. And the individual, what was your name, sir? Sam from the audience had indicated that there was some indication that those investigations weren't entirely completed to look under the buildings and under their areas to assess where the contaminants may be. Is that?
That's basically correct. They couldn't get at it because it's all.
Sure. Well, I'll get to that in the rest of my presentation because again, environmental work happens in a very stepwise fashion. Basically, it happens in different phases. There's a phase 1, a phase 2, and a phase 3 environmental assessment. This is looking from a 30,000 foot view at how we do our job and do our due diligence of these properties. So phase 1 kind of looks, okay, what happened at the property? Where are these AOC identified? Where the AOC are identified, a phase 2 says, okay, there are potential releases in those areas. Let's take soil samples. Let's take groundwater samples. air samples, what have you. And then kind of the phase 3, we call it, is nature, degree, and extent. What's the model? If I had a picture under the ground, what does it look like? Where is it? What's the extent? Is it in the groundwater? If it is, how far did it go in the groundwater? So those investigations in the 90s took us all the way to that phase 3. And that's where I'm getting to right here in 2005. So again, I say the mid-90s, it takes us all the way to 2005 when the consultant for the responsible party put together what's called the remedial action plan. And that says, okay, we have the extent of this contamination underground understood. And now this is how we're going to approach cleaning it up. And there's all different number of alternatives, keeping it in place, removing it, injecting things, all sorts of technologies that we could utilize. But their remedial action plan indicated they were going to do soil excavation in targeted areas. And then yet another acronym. David loves all the acronyms that I use when I talk about this stuff, but it's called the ELR. Now the state's calling it EU. They dropped the L, but I still refer to it as the ELR, environmental land use restriction, and then monitored natural attenuation. That's kind of fancy word for saying, okay, we're going to look at stuff in the groundwater and see how it breaks down chemically, biologically, through any number of factors. So they did get the site, to answer your question. They felt they had done all the environmental investigations necessary to develop this remedial action.
Let's say they, is it Brunswick?
Yeah, Brunswick is the responsible party right now. In the state of Connecticut's eyes, is they are the ones who are responsible for investigating and remediating to the standards that we had set. Okay. As I mentioned, in 2006, they had done targeted soil excavations throughout the property. That generated about 1,700 cubic yards of soil that was removed from the site. And when I say removed from the site, it was taken off-site for disposal, recycle, however they sent it, but it was removed from the site. After those excavations, they wanted to determine, okay, what did those excavations do? Were we successful? Were we not? Between 2006, 2014, they did groundwater monitoring. And like I said, completed to assess, okay, were those excavations successful? What's currently part of their plan is these environmental land use restrictions. They're currently proposed. They'd allow these impacts to be left in place underneath the building, prevent access to those. Other areas are covered by pavement, or they would apply clean soil caps, we call them, to not allow access to that soil. And overarching, no, that's right, sorry. Overarching, they would not allow for residential use. It would restrict it to its current use as an industrial commercial property. So what I have here in this picture, look at this, it's a little hard to see, but this hatched areas represent the buildings. This hatching would be yellow. And these blue hatched areas are areas where they have contaminated soil that would be left in place and covered by these environmental land use restrictions to prevent exposure to these soils. That's under existing conditions. Like I said, under David's conceptual plans, there would likely, depending upon the end use, need to be more that would need to be done. And we'll cover that in a bit. As David had said, the other parcel is the north parcel. It's located directly behind the building as we sit here, between Midgeon Ave and the river. It's 13 acres. There's some debate. I've seen reports. We're still working with the town. Some documents say it's 8.5. The land records say it's 11. It's immediately adjacent to the Naugatuck River. There's a couple photos that were taken during that same site walk that David had pointed out. And similar to many other mills and factories of that era, it was historically used and unpermitted for solid waste disposal. Again, these facilities generated a lot of solid waste. They were conducting a lot of manufacturing operations. Rather than carting it off, you had an adjacent piece of property, placed it there. Again, assessments were completed in that area between the 90s and the 2000s. The solid waste area of all those acres is only about 1.7 acres and about 18 thick in some areas. Which basically relates to the topographic change from behind the Brunswick manufacturing parcel down to the water's edge. The contents include, this is again based on reports that have been reviewed, demolition debris, solid waste, tires, plastic, brick, concrete, scrap metal, and glass. Again, manufacturing waste. Okay, we don't need it. It goes out to the landfill. In 2017, Brunswick submitted a closure plan for that unpermitted landfill under a permit application to the Connecticut DEP, which is Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. And they had indicated areas of waste would be consolidated, capped, and the area would remain undeveloped. In order to do such, they'd place on the land records restrictions allowing for use. Again, right before COVID, Connecticut DEP approves the landfill closure plan. Long-term obligations under that plan, and I'll show you a picture of what that looks like. Would be capping, like I said, initiated followed by capping, groundwater monitoring, and regular inspections to make sure that cover that's placed over those materials, which if you go back there now, there is a decent cover over the material, soil cover, albeit, but there it is covered. When we did our site walk, I don't think we had seen much of anything poking out. So here's the conceptual plan. Again, using shading. Basically, all colors are where the material exists. And the blue areas will be placed on the green areas and then capped. So that's the consolidation. Take the blue, you move it over to the green, which also has its own waste, and it gets capped.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
On the term capping,
Sure.
does it always mean something solid like asphalt concrete, or does it mean soil? You're implying it.
No, environmentally, capping could mean any. Oh, sorry.
No, I'm just counting.
It can mean any number of things. There's capping that is a certain volume or thickness of soil that is placed over something. There's capping such as asphalt, there's impermeable caps. They're all used to isolate, I'll use that word, soil, or not allow for drainage through that soil. There's all different applications.
So I said we weren't gonna lecture, and I feel like we just lectured. But just a couple more points I want to make, and then I would like you to go back to your tables and continue the conversation, and we're gonna have a Q&A afterwards. I'm worried if we do the Q&A now, we're not gonna get to harnessing your ideas, and I want to make sure we do that. The first is, these are complex, long-term endeavors. We gave you a history there. Nothing is likely to happen on that site in the very near term for a while. So just keep that in mind. However, over time, with the right decisions, the right leadership, the right funding, the right uses, the right market, these places can transform quite a lot incrementally. And in aggregate, over the course of a few years, rapidly transform. We think this might be one of those areas. However, it is complex, and so thank you for bearing with us as we go through all of the acronyms that John, he only scratched the surface. I assure you he's got dozens more that he'll throw at you. And the third thing is, we work in a reiterative fashion, so the economics, the environmental, and the reuse scenarios really have to happen together. Because when John says the level of remediation determines the type of use that can go there, that means that residential might not be possible unless a little bit more remediation is done. Whereas if it's an industrial use, maybe a community college wants to put a new manufacturing program in a building, that doesn't have to change because it's still another industrial use. So we'll figure that stuff out over the next 4 to 6 months, and bear with us, we don't have those answers, but that's the direction that we're going. So what I'd love you to do is to get back in your team of 4 or 5, think broadly about the vision for this site, and we may try to create a breakout room for those of you attending virtually. And then whatever your concerns, it's now 7:15. At 7:30, I'd like one person from each table to report back what your group said. We're going to take notes, then we're going to ask some questions about those in attendance virtually. Okay? And if you aren't assigned to a table, we'll put you on one. Am I too heavy-handed? Okay. Do you want to be more heavy-handed? I can do that.
Raring to go.
How do you put residential, commercial, industrial?
Let me just get these guys on board here.
We don't think about that.
Let me see if I can create a breakout room for you.
Big buddy.
What do I join a?
I don't want to go in it.
No, I mean,
No, I want to see who's part of the. I waited for that. Who's paying these people to be here?
Oh, we gotta go.
no.
I missed that part.
I'm just saying.
I missed that.
I hear things.
The city's investing,
Those of you attending remotely, I wanted to create a breakout room so you could chat amongst yourselves, but I think it had to be set up prior to our Zoom. So maybe if you could just marinate on these two questions and we'll circle back with you in 15 minutes, okay?
Simple question. Your meeting. Not going anywhere else. So the vision, there are ideas about the board. Say between Scravy. Yeah.
So there's, we cultivate always the zone.
Well, I would say, are there particular uses that you think we're gonna along that stretch? And how do we track them? Think of the market? Always driven back and forth, but I haven't. Well, there's this. You mean north or south? The other. Yeah, we had. Yes. Yeah. Very topographically challenged, you know, a lot of hills and sands on landfill, but not trails.
I gotta get up there.
Yeah.
You know, tell them it's a garage, they have to be, I mean, a house for them, if there's a trail.
Because of the right of way.
Yeah, well, I also.
And it goes to the. I know that. But it it never took for us, but don't get
Bring that up. So is it on this image that the space that you're talking about?
Yeah.
Well, whatever. Yeah. We're gonna.
If you press that. Right button there.
There's the dam.
Okay, yeah,
And the park is right here.
gotcha, okay. What's the name of it?
Co Dam Park. Co, C-O-E, Co
Okay.
Dam Park.
Okay, right down there. And you say it's been growing, how is that possible?
When I say growing, I mean over the years since 2009, we've expanded a little bit. Taking over more instead of letting the weeds come up.
I see, manicuring. Got it, okay. Okay.
And it is a historic area.
Each got up there. Yes. Well, there's.
All right, I didn't mean to cut you off. Yeah, the most interesting places are places where these just come together. Traditional zoning kept things separate. For a good reason.
And I didn't say.
Right. Yeah. Well, the nature of industry is changing. That's the thing. So we're not looking at slaughterhouses anymore, although those. So how does industry change or allow other uses to be a little bit more?
We've lost from a back to zero. One great one. He's made number one manufacturer. Yeah, I. And he moved down. This town. More and more and more. Yeah, he went, and then he was selling the. Whatever.
Well, I mean, like, the market's got the same thing, it's like, you know. This region's got a small. Small. Small.
That's not complicated. Straight.
Yeah.
One big door. Every single one.
That's what he's doing. I'm like, where's the other? He's doing those ones on pretty much. Yeah. Well, he's almost. Yeah.
That's what's.
So the lease, I mean, the lease there. So
They need this. We don't have any place to go.
Oh, Alan's got more, he needs to build more. In his industrial parts.
I think it's. Another industrial. But that wouldn't be.
He's got more land good for economics, but no, nice places.
You mean the building?
Business.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they still bring business.
That's right.
It brings people.
Yeah, but you get them to be in a place that has.
When you go back together.
Bigger effects.
How they would live with hardship. They're not paying one time taxes. All those beautiful buildings, they're okay. Okay, I have no problem. Don't tell me that it's private, except for people that don't. They're not making any money. We're still paying our taxes. Yeah, all of them. They're getting federal grants. And I never thought of getting. You know, and I live right next to the one, the main one. Which is in downtown. No, I'm up in where University. Oh, and
Fine.
yeah, you better not let that other land go. She said she wasn't going across the street. No, they haven't let over that.
Yeah.
Got about 5 minutes, 5 minutes.
That's terrible.
That's that one little car. They better figure something else. Yeah, they just did the practice. They couldn't do it when it was the state, they didn't have the money to do that, that's the. Yeah. It could have been Northwestern Connecticut, or one of the others, if they had used their head. You, Northwestern could have put another school there, or something else. They're out of the room, I mean, all these places.
It's on, it's,
3 miles.
yeah, just straight up
Route 4.
So we're on Route 4.
I'm not being anything on it except, there's so many things that come into this town that don't pay taxes. There's a beautiful thing called, well, that's another one. Church. Go to corner home. That's so sickening.
Yeah.
Building used to bring in big money. And they scramble through that, get a throw, taxes. I'm to church. And there's not one penny coming in. Well, that's not the only. Yeah,
But we're trying to make, but you can't start to make smart, educated. Well, I mean, they still need permitting, you know, to go in and out, but they, you know.
right in front of them.
Yeah. But, you know, you can't deny someone if they do the right thing, you know, if they do what you ask. them to do.
All right, 1 minute warning, 1 minute warning.
Totally agree with you. That's, that.
Right, as long as they do what we ask them to
You know,
do.
especially you know where you are,
Right.
you're in that position.
All right, Glenn.
Thank you again.
Yeah, of course.
I'll listen for a couple seconds.
Yeah.
There you go, there you go.
Where you guys out of?
Cambridge, Massachusetts.
You were the lucky bidder, huh? On the project.
Oh, yes, yeah,
You do a lot of. Right.
we do a lot of this work, yeah. And,
What do you get out of it? It's nothing, right? Once you come up with a feasible plan, you're paid and you're done, right?
well,
Or no?
the environmental piece tends to go on
Well, the
for quite a
environmental
while,
goes on
yeah.
until it's straight.
The urban design piece, less so, unless there's architectural needs, you know, but that doesn't happen too often.
This area over here, New Brunswick, right across the street, there's a major oil company. And where the gas station is there now, that little gas.
Yes,
station.
yeah.
When they put the tanks in that last year, you went by, being an environmental person, raw oil. When they pulled the tank out, and they were blaming it on the garage next door that he did it.
Oh,
And he went over there and called DEP and they came out, he goes, what's that look like to you? And that's running there into the sewer and into Brunswick.
thank you all for joining us remotely. We're gonna actually have some report outs from the different tables. There are 3 tables of 4 people here. And after we hear from them, we're gonna open it up to you and hear your thoughts. So bear with us, and it may be hard to hear the groups, but we'll circle back with you, okay? All right. Time's up. You can use that.
But wait, one more thing, before they do that. The only thing you have to remember is if it bleeds through.
Yeah, I asked them to double check. Okay. It might be easier if you come forward, if you take your chairs again, if you come on up, and if I could ask one loud, loud, articulate person to describe what happened in your table. So come on up. I did let those in attendance virtually know that we'll open it up to them. So let me, is there a volunteer for one of the 3 tables? Okay, so if you want to come on up, if you can face the audience, and then we're gonna take notes up top to try to translate it. All of this will be recorded. We'll share it out with you as long as you sign up on our sign-up sheet.
So our group had 2 residents and then 2 like city folks who know more of the nitty gritty of how this all works, but we talked about kind of the need to address things like traffic flow and liability, but we also talked about for the vision, really trying to connect it to downtown and make it a gathering space for people. So utilizing the river with green space, bike ped trails that both are for recreation and for transportation and access to downtown. Having something that brings people together, so like sort of a food hall, art studio, makerspace type of thing. And then mixed use, so businesses on the ground floor and living space above for the multi-floor buildings, and really trying to get some affordable apartments in there along with regular income apartments. And just really trying to make Torrington a draw and improve its reputation. Anything else?
And barriers?
Money.
There's that.
There you go. Environmental situation. Seems a little daunting.
Sure, we're not yet sure.
It's a hurt.
I don't want you to leave here thinking that place will never transform because it's the dirtiest thing you've ever seen. However, you have to figure that out.
That's true, and just to add to that, we kind of had a seminal moment a couple of weeks ago where we got much more environmental information to review. So again, take what I said at 30,000 foot, we're moving our way down. Closer.
Demystifying the facts actually is part of our role here. Just let's get clarity about what's there. Yeah, okay, thank you, that was great.
Are we gonna keep the sheets? What do you wanna do with the sheets?
Yeah, we'll Xerox them, that's a term.
Old artist dated himself.
Only have to say Xerox.
You said mimeograph, then.
All right, thank you for that. Great. Table number 2. If you want to come on up and remember this group goal.
Okay. Well, some of the visions that we had were increased tax base income through mixed use, using some of the older buildings, maybe tie into the green space. We're thinking of maybe like a 55 and over community. We do have one in town. And it's thriving. I hear it's very difficult to get in there, so that was one of the ideas that we had. Staying with the community aspect of it also. Again, green space development. Some of the primary concerns of that are non-tax-based businesses or low-income housing that would come in, possibly oversaturation of plazas, retail and like box locations would be some of the concerns moving forward through the resident space.
What does it mean, oversaturation of plazas?
Again, something that is too many box stores,
Oh.
not having that.
Not
sort
open
retail.
space.
Not open, yeah, just a physical square box stores of Kohl's or one of those. that type of thing.
So a decent sized Target is about 60 to 70,000 square feet. The entirety of this complex is 210. So it would take a lot to fill it out. Okay, great, thank you. And one more.
So we echoed a lot of the thoughts that the comments that have preceded our table report. We also like the idea of a mixed use development. Kind of create a new hub in this part of town. There's not a, there's scattered commercial development, there's residential. Create a new like center where a lot of things exist, symbiotically, to one supporting the other. And, with the focus on the arts in Torrington, we thought, studio spaces and galleries for artists, might be part of the mixed use things that could go in there. Housing, but now with the environmental conditions, I don't know, maybe there's some areas that could be housing, like the office building for one.
It's not in that patch.
That you mentioned, that might be something that could readily be converted to housing. And we also like the idea of, adding the manufacturing space or maker space into the mixed use. Linear Park seems like a home run, if you could start up in West Torrington at the head of that 12-acre parcel, come all the way down through and, eventually connect to the park that Jim built down by the Brass Mill Dam further downstream. Be some challenges to get the trail that far, but it could then connect to another complex that might be a mixed-use complex, the old Hotchkiss Brothers plant further down, which has been approved for some redevelopment already.
So the long term goal is to connect from downtown to Stillwater. So
Yeah.
we're right in that corridor.
Okay, so it's perfect, perfect.
Although, as was pointed out, it does abut private property. So when you say there are complications, if you own property there, the likelihood of you providing an easement may not be as obvious as it seems.
Yeah, there's some flood control dikes that run along the river too. And I think the city may control the use of those, so that would be an opportunity.
Some of the properties, they'll go right down to the edge of the river.
Oh, yeah, even though there's the flood control.
So
Wow.
Carpelli's property went right down to the river.
Did it really? Wow. Complications.
So there's-
That's what,
Yeah.
that's what we want.
That's what surveys for.
Right. And we also think, the property over here has, the ability to be a much better contributor to Torrington's tax base if this goes through. So there's a benefit for the city to pursue this because it can improve the tax base. Now, as far as concerns, we wondered, what was salvageable, what was not. But we also thought that preserving as much of the historic fabric was important because that could give the property more cachet, make it more interesting place for, housing and a whole host of uses.
Can I interrupt you for a
Yep.
second? I saw a lot of people's heads nod when he said that preserving as much of the complex as possible. Is that a general sentiment or are there voices here that think, oh, they're old and dilapidated, they should come down?
I think they're brick buildings. You gotta see. You gotta.
Does anyone think differently?
I mean, I'll just say, saving everything if it's not possible, like picking and choosing what to save and what could be better used. You could add a few more stories or something.
Or
But
could there be
keeping as much as
new
possible.
development on a portion of a site that would still be open? Possibly, yeah,
As
okay.
long as they complement and look.
Okay, so we're glad to hear that. There are sometimes difficult decisions. If there's limited resources, do you invest those in the worst buildings to stabilize them? Or do you remove a couple because they're gonna be very expensive and dedicate those resources to buildings that are more likely to be reused? We'll try to work through it. It's a math problem.
In DC, they just kept facades of some of the buildings.
That's called a facadectomy. Yes. It's possible, also expensive. Yeah. Okay, I didn't mean to interrupt.
That's okay, that's okay. I'm glad you did, because we got that out of the way. The historic preservation thing, generally in favor, but I think people are flexible as I would be to, working with the options.
In our conversation with the property owner, he's sympathetic to that idea.
Mhm. So that's good, that's good. Now, the other concern we had was the economics. These tend to be, it takes a big investment to make this happen. And economically, something you mentioned earlier might be the way to go here, a phased approach to phase one. If it's successful, it generates interest in investors doing another phase and again. So that might be something to consider because for somebody coming in and do that whole thing, that would be a really difficult.
Silver bullets really never work. So an incremental approach is the right way.
And we also talked about follow through by different city administrations. If it's a long-term project, it would need to have support of successive city administrations to truly be successful.
And as Val mentioned, this is a very important priority for the mayor. She's got a conflict tonight, but she's been very much involved in our initial work and will stay involved moving forward.
Okay, I took some notes in here, so I'd be happy to email this to you if you write your
Oh,
email.
we'll just take a picture of it.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
Okay,
Fine.
great. Well, thank you. There's some overlaps there. I'm gonna open it up to the group if they'd like to participate, and then we'll do a little Q&A. I promise I'll get you out by 8, so you've been very patient. Thank you for that. So, would anyone like to share their thoughts? And I'm gonna put the microphone up to the computer. Clev, you look like you're about to say something. Or Agata? I've always been told to wait 10 seconds after I ask a question to see if there's an answer. Yeah, Clev, do you have your hand up?
Yes. I've been thinking, in the 1980s, I heard something on on a radio program that fascinated me. There, at that time, there were 15 what do you call them? Local taverns. There were 15 taverns in the state of Connecticut. And out of those 15, 8 were in Torrington, which is incredible. And the explanation that was given was that Torrington was still a relatively small community of neighborhoods. And that kept these taverns alive because otherwise they couldn't survive. They were competing against bars which could offer more than wine and beer. But in Torrington, the people in these neighborhoods supported their local businesses and churches. And I think that that's what's being lost everywhere today. And maybe we should try to emphasize that when we create new areas for people to live in.
Thank you for that. It talks about walkability and neighborhood character. That's very important. Thank you for that. Another comment, Agata? It says connecting to audio there. Any other comments from those? No. Well, we will make this recording available. And again, please reach out to us if you have any comments. I want to turn back to the audience here and we'll recap in a few minutes. So again, thank you for staying. I don't want to rush you out, but what questions do you have for us? Because I know we threw a lot at you. Yeah.
I brought it up to you, but I don't want to bring it up to the rest of the audience. The only thing, I was talking to Mr. Lightford, so we have somebody now that works with us. But the big thing in this town always, if the land set high on it, industrial, could be used for nothing else, which has been a big joke for many years. Now we have an industrial property, all of a sudden, we're gonna make apartments out of it. I can't quite figure that. So we really have to, Mr. Lightford said that he would work on it. But this has been going on totally for years in this town. And you've had a piece of industrial or commercial, it stayed that way and you couldn't do another thing with it.
This property though is not zone industrial.
Yes, it is. It was, yeah, it was industrial, it was changed.
Industrial,
It
changed.
was changed
local position.
when the current owner.
Still local business either way.
Yeah.
There's still pieces, some pieces.
Yeah.
That is,
Right,
But you brought it up as industrial when they brought it up here.
but as the world turns,
yeah,
always needing to.
Right.
The zoning of today was not, if you go back to
1923.
23, the zoning back then, there wasn't.
I'm talking 5 years
No,
back.
I understand that, but what I'm saying is you're going to see the transition take place, because it has to happen,
But it hasn't.
but it will. That's what I'm trying to get at.
Well, zoning is, yeah.
We may not see it, you and I might not see it, okay, but we're not.
That means
we're
it's
not
way
down-
too long though.
there was an old way of zoning where everything was separated into uses and that's not. There's hybrid ways of zoning, that's not really the way things are done anymore, but
Like I said, when the MDP was done back in 2000, basically, what we're talking about today is, the MDP was pretty much right in the same idea. You gotta have housing, you gotta have people. Without people, you don't have activity.
so
You can't ask somebody to locate a business or a restaurant or something if you don't have parking, somebody going by it.
But a watershed moment was when the zoning went to the many properties to downtown development. Downtown development changed, parking requirements. I mean, it basically attracted anybody that could be attracted.
You're both right, actually, and if zoning was about the separation of uses, the most interesting places in cities tend to be where uses come together.
Correct.
And I think we have to look at that, and this notion of an organic growth, a little bit of residential, a little bit industrial, a little commercial. That tends to be the magic,
Get a manufacturing with 35%.
not a 35,
That's not gonna happen.
no,
Never again.
but 100?
Maybe.
Yeah,
That would be-
I'm gonna tell you.
What we gleaned out of the market study, right, it kind of bears that out, that we really ought to be leaning on maker spaces and small manufacturing.
Yeah, it's the new face of a lot of manufacturing, and the key thing I hope I underscore is it's a priority of the state of Connecticut. There's lots of new funding programs. At Naugatuck Valley just added an advanced manufacturing campus in Danbury. They're really trying to invest so that there's a new wave of talent, there's new wave, because there's obviously tons of jobs that are needed. Who's gonna fill those? The ideas for the folks that are starting to go to school, retraining programs. and this kind of-
That was all done for electric boat.
Exactly, yes.
That's what I was saying to you, and you were hearing me before, what I was saying is that in the state of Connecticut, like, Pratt & Whitney Electric Program, Hamilton Standard, we have some base businesses that really allow companies to thrive because they're feeding them. And the reality of this, I told you about my business, it's not the case. The OEMs that we deal with, we're a tier one supplier. We're basically forced to compete, and that means we can't expand here, it's too costly. So we have to go other places.
Yeah.
But that's why I say manufacturing is vital. And we should take advantage of it to the extent that we can.
I was just wondering if you could talk about next steps or timeframe.
So, thank you for that.
Beautiful segue.
Uh, Well. As I said before, so the environmental, the economic, and the design is working together. It's a reiterative process. We will come back in another meeting. Early fall.
Yeah.
Probably when we get, it takes a while to go through those boxes that John was talking about. So from the market assessment, we have to update some census data. The mayor and the administration is keen to know a little bit more about the demographics. We have to dig into that. One of the challenges that we often face in these examples is the comparables are harder to find. Where is the project, the mixed-use project that has 3 or 4 things together, and what made that successful? So we're trying to do more research in the region on that. The environmental, we need to dig in, look under the rocks, and really Weston and Sampson is one of the best in the country at this. This is what they do. And we'll figure out exactly what those environmental conditions are, report that back, and again, the property owner is keen to understand that as much as anyone. We do have a technical advisory committee that Val and Jeremy mentioned. We interface with them and as we go through the process. And then we're going to break out in some more specific focus groups with developers, with arts and culture, with realtors to better understand some of these dynamics. And these are one-on-one or small group conversations that will learn something different than in a big public meeting where these groups don't always want to share what they learn. And then lastly, so, we're starting to develop concepts like this. This is the boiler house, 4,000 square feet, the roof is falling down. But boy, imagine if that one of those taverns moved into there, because now it faces a river, and boy, you've got lots of parking around there, and there's a way to get a permit, and there's a existing tavern that's in another town that would love to expand. So we try to get things seeded, literally seed them before the project is over, so that there's a life after the planning. So we will look for partners who want to co-locate, oftentimes bringing existing buildings together and creating a critical mass. This entrepreneur, this business, they co-locate, boy, crave if they had another coffee shop here or something. With plenty of parking, greater visibility, so we'll start to create drawings like this that attract investment and allow developers who may not be thinking about Torrington to locate here And these are just concepts, but it's a little bit of back and forth. So that from a design perspective are the things that we're looking at to make that connection from Michigan to the river. And that's what we're developing further. Again, the Rhodeses are interested. They are participating. They're keen to know what to do. I understand from Charles Rhodes, he's interested in keeping some of these buildings. He doesn't want to demolish them, so bear with us as we work through the complications. And I'll turn it back to Jeremy and Val, and they can summarize.
Well, I mean, I don't have much more to add, except to really thank everybody for participating, the people on Zoom for participating. If you haven't, signed that sheet that was floating around, we'll get this, anybody that signed that or anybody that wants to contact me, in the, planning office, I'll get this presentation out to everyone, and I'm always available to answer questions if anybody wants to get in touch with me.
So we can post it on the city's website?
Yeah, we'll post it up there too. Yep.
Did everyone sign it here? We sign it?
Yep.
How many
Alright.
names do you have? Do you have no bodies?
At least 15.
Travis as well.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank
everybody.
you.
Thanks.
If something's bad. Yeah.
Right. Hey, it's
Right, yeah.
Thank you, sir.
I still.
Thank you.
Still sitting there, but I have no idea. I have no idea. Yeah. So, it should be, yeah, it should be far. Well, it was.